when we were planning this, we decided we needed someone to set the philosophical framework for what we're trying to do today. And we gave a lot of thought to who that should be, and decided that we had many possibilities, but settled on Dr. Joyce Cacho, who's one of the fellows with the center. And when I first met Joyce and had lunch with her last summer, I realized I was in the presence of a very special person. Joyce has an academic background, degree from the University of Missouri, and has worked at major banks. She has international experience in Africa. But sustainability is a passion for her, and she truly understands this notion of triple bottom line and how those three factors interact with one another. She's currently the president and CEO of Adinura Advisory, but 20 years of experience in international corporate and investment banking and in nonprofit enterprises. She was the sustainability director for Novus International and still does consulting with them. She has been very involved in the Global Reporting Index, the GRI, and here in St. Louis, while she's a relative newcomer, has already become involved in many organizations. Her bio is on page 20 of the book, so I'm not going to give any more of the specifics, so we can listen to Joyce. And when Joyce is finished and off the stage, if our plenary panel could just start moving forward, that would be great. So Joyce, welcome, and we look forward to hearing from you.
It is my honor and pleasure to stand in front of you. But before I launch into talking about what is sustainability and what is sustainability development, let me thank really the leadership and the vision and the warm welcome of Diana Carlin, Dr. Manoj Patankar, and of course Daniel. I think that, as Diane has shared with you, I have an international background, and if there's any theme that is going to get us to work together because we have a shared goal, be it emerging markets, be it developing countries, be it developed markets, developed countries, it's going to be sustainability. On November 14th here in St. Louis, there's going to be what I believe is a first-time gathering. So across all the 93 municipalities, can you imagine that, defining a municipality? So the greater St. Louis area, across all the 93 municipalities, we're going to come together about branding St. Louis in the interest of sustainable St. Louis. So you are part of the early warning system, that this is not just about recovery, this is about growth, and I compliment you. And as a friend of mine did for me, before I actually was awarded my Ph.D., I think we need a round of applause for being the canary in the cave on this one. The Center for Sustainability at SLU is yet another example of how SLU in this community and beyond provides leadership. It's with, as you've heard before this morning, the vision of the Raiche Foundation that we're actually charged to be here together today. And when you've planted a flag, there's always others to come along. So there comes Bamboo Public Company Limited and the Monarch Cement Company for this first ever conference that will enable us to begin the discussion about a systematic approach to creating communities and businesses that will stand the test of the uncertainty of the risk associated with changing weather patterns. With this being a first ever conference, it's important that we start with a common understanding of the word that describes the conference: sustainability and sustainable development. Next, a brief, pointed review of the situations, disasters we call them, that increasingly knock us off the certainty or predictable path of the past. We will also explore the interrelationships between the anchors of the triple bottom line. Again, you've heard that earlier today, of people, planet, and profit, which captures the expanded spectrum of values and criteria for measuring organizational and societal success as it relates to managing today's needs of the community, limited natural resources, and the public and private sectors to be strong foundations for generations to come. What do the words and the context have to do with each other? The answer is in the how and the why. How can we capture the opportunity for investing in transformational resilience? Why does innovation play such a pivotal role? Well, the noun sustainability is today more popular than the adjective sustainable. Sustainability is today more popular than the adjective, that is the word sustainable. Historically, the word was used to describe the way in which society and individuals used or deployed resources, be they financial or natural resources. Sustainable was first used somewhere around 1727, almost 50 years before our country's independence in 1776, when the Anglo population was 2.5 million, according to the Census Bureau. Where we are seated today, in St. Louis, Missouri, and all the surrounding states, we're still in the Louisiana Territory. It was only in 1732 that Benjamin Franklin, by then the publisher of the Pennsylvania Gazette, the most popular colonial newspaper, begins publishing Poor Richard's Almanac, containing weather predictions, humor, proverbs, and epigrams, selling nearly 10,000 copies a year. Famous pithy phrases by Franklin, such as, "A penny saved is a penny earned," comes from Poor Richard's Almanac. Franklin would retire from publishing business and started concentrating on science, experiments, and inventions, the most noteworthy of which is the kite experiment, which verified the nature of electricity and lightning. In his later years, Franklin dedicated much of his time to politics. He was a delegate from Pennsylvania to the Second Continental Congress and served as a member of the 5-person team that drafted the Declaration of Independence and is a signature to the document that anchors our country. So in the early days, sustainable and sustainability did reflect the concern for balancing limited resources with the needs of future generations. The transition of Benjamin Franklin from publisher to scientist reflects the beginning of research to apply technology to harness resources that had previously thought to be beyond human reach. Let's fast forward to the 18th century, when world population is estimated at being 700 million, to the 1970s and 1980s. Estimated world population 30-plus years ago was just over 4 billion, and the annual growth rate was leveling off at 1.73%. This after post-World War II U.S. population growth rate as high of 2.06%. In 1970, the U.S. population was 203 million, give or take, with population in Missouri and surrounding states accounting for approximately 11%. The environmental movement gathered steam around that time. An association of scientists and political leaders known as the Club of Rome published their report called The Limits to Growth and drew attention to the growing pressure of natural resources from human activities. In 1972, the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment was held in Stockholm, and for the first time, united the representatives of multiple governments in discussion relating to the state of the global environment. The United States also passed new legislation, such as the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the National Environmental Policy Act, the foundations of the current environmental standards. Despite increased public awareness and growth in the fields of environmental sciences, ecology, technology, it is more recently that the people and community, as well as the economic dimensions, have been linked to thinking through solutions to the challenges of climate change. The sudden events caused by accidents in coal mines, on railroads, or by structural failure and weather events are notable, not only for the loss of human life, as was noted earlier, but also for the economic impact. This chart for the US shows that disaster events have trended upward over the past 100 years, with an increasing number of those events being related to weather, such as tornadoes, floods, and drought. Rough estimates of the cost of weather-related disasters over the 10 years from 2000 to 2009 is over $250 billion. The estimate for the 1990s is $76 billion. Prior to the 1990s, the highest the estimate for the cost of weather-related disasters ever hit was $8 billion. The disaster response phase of emergency management is shaped by population density, the exposure to hazardous conditions, and the possibilities or effects of cascading disasters. Local response coordination is critical and bridges to the disaster response coordination of the public sector by the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, who are quite busy today, quite frankly. The American Red Cross coordinates and leads nonprofit efforts of disaster relief organizations, including volunteers, donations, and distribution from many religious denominations and community service agencies. Resource mobilization in the response phase of disaster management relies on leadership that is disciplined and also agile enough to adapt to new information and changes in circumstances that may arise. Immediate actions to save human life is, of course, the priority. As actions in response to this phase ebb into the recovery phase, where the focus shifts to rebuilding, the window of opportunity to build back better, aiming to reduce the pre-disaster risks inherent in community and infrastructure, opens. The opening to build back better, might I coin the triple B opportunity, affords considering not only where the community had challenges prior to the disaster event, but also the aspects of the vision of the community for future generations. In the context of global warming and the impact of climate change, the opportunity to incorporate communication shifts such as the internet and smartphones, the increasing availability of diverse sources of energy, and innovations to support agricultural productivity that at the same time saves the environment is critical. Pivotal questions focusing on rejuvenating the community, especially when it comes to retaining and attracting younger people and encouraging the strengths of diversity by creating processes that make investment and reinvestment attractive to a broad base. Increased frequency of disaster events and the related costs locally, regionally, nationally, and dare I say internationally, drives us to examine the pillars for rebuilding better after a disaster. The goal of better means identifying frameworks, processes, and institutions that connect at least two of the people, profit, planet dimensions of sustainability. Key pillars include insurance, banking and finance, architectural design, construction, cell phone or mobile communication, energy generation and distribution, and overall management, health services, education, everything from the K through 12, including the community colleges and outstanding universities, tax planners and assessors, water management, community gathering institutions, hard infrastructure such as roads and bridges, businesses and regulators. Our policymakers in government also are included in this long list. Today, the how of linking these pillars is the priority. As the frequency of climate-related disasters increases, the pace of innovation also increases, and the opportunity to combine adaptation with mitigation is into a coherent strategy is what is in front of us today. In the latest report from CERAS, entitled Stormy Future for U.S. Property and Casualty Insurers, the Growing Costs and Risks of Extreme Weather Events, a plan of action for insurance companies, regulators, and investors to deal with increased risks tied to climate-driven disasters is laid out. Why is this important? Because the how of disaster response and recovery can impact the credit rating of the town, the county, the community, reflecting the value of directed decisions to build or rebuild better, making sure that investments by pension funds to banks and all the finance enterprises in between are consistently strong. We need to keep in mind the current practice of separate financial accounting and sustainability accounting are fast being expected by investors to be combined into a single report. When we look at the map where the drought of 2012 is evident, it reminds us that investment to reduce, reuse, and recycle globally limited resources, such as water, soil, and energy, are critical to the economic survival and growth of our region. In closing, I go back to a phrase, waste not, want not. Although simple, the phrase captures what we, gathered together today and tomorrow, are charged with accomplishing. That is, to listen, share, learn, and share in response to the ideas from fellow conference participants. In that cycle, the journey called sustainability development is about the joy, hard work, and opportunity of human resilience that can be bolstered by decisions of others. At the reception yesterday at the Kerr Foundation, we heard about the 4-foot wall and the power outlets accessible to the homeless. Both are examples of putting vision into investment decision, which then translates into actions on the part of the homeless and the people that work and visit the Kerr Foundation property. In this way, and many other ways, the Kerr Foundation, Raiche Foundation of St. Louis, Banpu of Thailand, Monarch Cement of Humboldt, Kansas, and HEC-TV are forces for continued learning and innovation to emphasize the opportunity to be active about waste not, want not, at the human level. As Diane pointed out, our program is being affected by some of these very climate change type events. Sandy is happening out east, and Sandy is different because, as a reporter said this morning, when was the last time we got all the way to S in naming storms? When was the last time we had a storm of this force in almost November? And that means that the predictions based on past data is not what is going to make us resilient going forward. It's the predictions based on recent experiences by Greentown, Joplin, by Greentown, Greenburg, that's going to position not only Joplin and Greenburg for a more resilient future, it's going to help position those larger cities out east for a future that we can all then look forward to. So, at the end of it all, it's really about the how, and the opportunity that we have over the next 2 days is to put together, start the beginnings of putting together that workbook that Greenburg was asking about when the disaster struck there. Because not only is it about the lives that were lost and paying homage to those lost lives, but it's about making sure that the next generation puts their efforts to innovating beyond the 3-foot walls, was it, of that rebuilt building in Greenburg. And with that, I say thank you very much for listening, and I wish you the best for a productive couple of days.
Thank you, Joyce. What a wonderful way to begin. Inspiring. One of the privileges of being a co-host is you leave stuff out, you can plug it in later. One of the things I wanted to do was acknowledge Joa for his exceptional work on putting this program together. Catherine helped, others helped, but Joa did all this on his little computer, and it's quite beautiful. So now we're going to talk with some of the leadership that is in place. So you know, you've got a normal day, one day where everything is going according to plan, at least somewhat, in your world. And a day later, it's completely turned upside down. How do you respond? What makes the difference in the direction that that community goes? Well, there are many factors, but one of the most important, if not the most important, is the leadership in place at that time. So our intent here, again, is to help you get inside the minds of people that are there at the disaster and how they make the decisions they did and what they might do differently next time, and most importantly, what they would advise to those going through it. Steve, do you want to come up and say anything?
Well, good morning, and I appreciate that, Daniel. Yeah, I was in Greensburg for 5 years. How time flies when you're having so much fun. So no, we actually had a very good time, and I was born in Greensburg. I still have family there, and it will always be an important thing in my heart. You know, being from Kansas originally, I'm a big Kansas basketball fan, Jayhawk fan. Yes, and you know, I was really impressed. My friends were really impressed I was coming here today, but they weren't impressed with the conference. They said, you know, St. Louis is going to be ranked in the top 10. You need to check out practice, you know. And so they were, I think that was kind of neat. But anyway, but you're going to hear a lot of technical things over the next couple of days, and I'm not going to go into a lot of that. I'm going to get to, I think, more of leadership and the importance of vision and planning. And make sure I've got this correct here. Okay, you know, you're going to see some pictures, but I like to show a few here. You know, Greensburg, typical rural community. I think you'll see a lot of people have seen the show. They've seen a lot of information about it. I think obviously this Google picture is this is pre-storm, and then you see post-storm from Google, and I think we've seen that many times, and I think this shows the devastation. And I think today what I want to make sure, if you hear anything I say, and remember one thing I say today, is that the importance of working with your community and plan for a future. I've gone onto western Oklahoma, and I'm currently in one of the biggest droughts it may be the biggest drought in Oklahoma history, and we're battling a water issue. And the same aspects that we're doing with Greensburg deal with that, because it's very important right now that you have leadership and you're working with the community. And I'll go on to say a few different things. Is that obviously you saw some pictures earlier. I think they speak for themselves. is that you see the challenge in front of you, but I don't think challenges come every day in different ways, and I think Greensburg is just one example of how you can move forward. You see the facts, a very large tornado, maybe the biggest one, compared also with Joplin, and the devastation was huge. The type of debris and stuff we dealt with and challenges were dealt with. But, that stuff happens every day. There are tornadoes that will happen, they could happen, this week, and those challenges continue on and on. It's really what happens after those disasters happen and how communities come together. It does create an opportunity. And I think people say today, well, leadership's important, and you've got to come together, and you've got to talk to people, and you've got to bring things together, and what a great plan you brought. Well, it's not about government bringing plans as much as it's about working with your community. It's never top down. And really the perfect scenario is when the top levels have good ideas, talking to the community, and the community has good ideas, and you meet in the middle, and you discuss, and you plan, and you look, and you decide, this is what we want to do. This is where we're going to go. We've got a vision, and if you don't have a vision, then what are you going to do? Well, we had talked to FEMA, we talked to different people, and I think Greensburg was very, very smart using common sense, and I think that's what's nice about Midwest America, the Midwest. We use common sense, and what's good for us, and you can talk lead, and you can talk all these things. That's all great, but really it came down to common sense. What's it mean to us today, and what's it mean to our kids in the future, and will our community come back? We'd heard about studies about, cities that had disasters, and same storm, two cities about the same size, wiped out. One city, as quickly as possible, afraid of challenges, decides to rebuild their community as quick as possible, just disregard all planning, just move quickly. They came back very quickly, and that at that point in time, that calmed the waters. The other city planned, slow coming back, try to have a vision, look beyond just today and the future. Okay, they were very slow coming back. Now you look 10 years and 20 years later, the community that came back real quick, that didn't have a plan, they're struggling, their population is struggling, their businesses are struggling. The community that had a plan is growing, population beyond pre-storm, a vibrant new community that had a good plan, a new direction, a good vision because people work together. That's what Greensburg wanted. That's what every community wants. That's what I want in Clinton, Oklahoma, and we are a size, 10 times bigger than Greensburg, but we have the same issues, same problems, same challenges, and the same direction can help us move forward in the future. It's about future opportunities with future generations, and I say this because everything that I do day to day, I like to think of it as, is it good for my family? What I'm doing for my community, is it good for my family? I had a little boy who just turned 7, his name's Gunner, and he is the cutest boy in the world. I'm not making that up. He is the cutest little kid in the world. I'm not biased, I promise you. But those are things that we want to do, and I think this is a nice little slide here. And I think some people have said it, that pre-storm, Greensburg's biggest export was its youth. You graduate high school, they go to college, they don't come back. And why is that? Because of jobs, because of a plan. And here created this opportunity of a new direction, how to reverse the trend that was happening, and how do we go forward in the future. Again, leadership is very important. I think it's important to understand what your community looks like, understand the communications with the community is very important. Have a message. Leaders need to have a message. Don't get off that message. Understand that message and continue it through the tough times, difficult times. And I also want to think communications in the community and everything comes together because the community wants to rally around something. Greensburg got to rally around green. I heard people laugh at me in those jokes and say, what would have happened if the name would have been Blacksburg, Kansas? And I said, we still gone green, just would have been a little different. But it was unique and it all worked together, and we took that and we marketed that, and they're still marketing that today, and they're going to be successful in the future. And I think other communities, I do that in Clinton, Oklahoma. What's our brand? What's our vision? What's our message? And the leaders have to be on the same page. Chamber of Commerce, the schools, the city, everybody has to be on the same page working together. A lot of that talks about involvement, working with the community. We had a tremendous amount of town hall meetings. I think it's important to get vision and get things back and feedback from the community. I like to laugh at that show on television at Parks and Rec, and I was watching that one scene where she goes, "Thanks for coming out today to our town hall meeting." You look in the audience, like 5 people. You know, that wasn't the case after the tornado in Greensburg. We had hundreds, 600-700 people show up at meetings. People wanted to be involved. We let them be involved. You have to let them be involved. And because working together allows opportunities and allows success to happen. And there's challenges, but if we're all working together and talking about it, and from those meetings came lots of different subcommittees and different things. And I think you'll hear all the planning stuff, and I think every community does it. But it's so critical. And that you don't just have those meetings, you follow up on those meetings, and you let those committees bring back, and you push forward, and you have plans and goals and agendas, and you try to meet those goals. And you know, it's a document of planning. It's not something, it sits on the shelf and collects dust. It's got to be a living document you're looking at all the time. You're working with future council members, future board members, future staff members, community leaders. You're talking and moving forward on that plan on a regular daily basis. It's nice to see a plan after a disaster because a plan creates vision. I like to see the future. I know where we're going. We had great planners come in. I think that's important to have professionals help you. You know, I'm one person of a big disaster with a small staff. We had to bring in professionals, and we did that. And I think they worked great with the community. And I like to show the neat things. You know, our wind towers and understanding what was important. You know, one of the things that the wind that blew Greensburg away is energizing Greensburg today. I think that's a great story. And really the first small community wind farm in the state of Kansas. What a great, and this took a lot of different people to put together, but because we had a vision, we had and we were persistent, bugging a lot of people and really trying to understand, hey, this is what you need to help us with. We'll be partners. And the partnership came together, and it's a great story. And I'm talking fast. I'm sorry, because I usually talk about an hour about this stuff, and I'm going through it quickly, so I don't want to get my 1 minute time thing here. But you know, here's the thing. I mean, Greensburg made major changes and took major risks. And I think the fact we did that and we stayed the course allowed a lot of opportunities. These cities struggle today. I'm trying to implement some things in Clinton, Oklahoma right now. Single stream, curbside recycling at no cost to my citizens, just want to do it and we have to make a few changes. And I'm in a very conservative part of the country, and they're looking at me today going, you know, we want to recycle, but do I have to get rid of my dumpster in my backyard and all these little things? I'm like, and we're just fighting the little things because we're fighting the vision. And sometimes the disaster creates an opportunity for us to see beyond today, beyond the debris, beyond the struggles. And communities today that they don't have a major disaster because they don't have a tornado, these same elements can work in their community. Understand, okay, you've got to fight through, you've got to work through the community, you've got to let them understand why is it important to recycle, why is it important financially to build a sustainable building. We're building a LEED certified fire station in Western Oklahoma. In Western Oklahoma, LEED is like, LEED, what's that mean? You know, and I said, it just means we're just going to do it the right way, going to save you money. Oh, save money, I like that, you know. But we had to continue to educate our community. But we're moving in that direction because it's the right thing to do. And I think, and they're starting to understand that from the chamber to the schools. And my little son, he sees a piece of trash on the ground, he picks it up and goes, Dad, Mother Earth, let's save Mother Earth. I said, yeah, that's right, buddy, go pick it up. So we're just trying to do little smart things, and the kids help us do that. And I love to show the pictures. I think we did a lot of unique things. I mean, listen, we can talk green, we can talk sustainability, but sometimes sustainability is what's good for our business community, what's good for our operations and different things. You know, number one, fiscal responsibility. I think of that every day when I talk about sustainability. Is it fiscally the right thing for us to do today, tomorrow? Because here I walk into a drought. The reason I'm struggling with the water issue in Western Oklahoma is not really because of the drought. That's one aspect, because of lack of planning. I don't want to do that to my community when I leave. We got to have a good plan, a good direction, so that when I'm gone in 10, 15 years, when the next drought comes, there's not a water issue. You know, there's not problems. There's not, you know, we've got a plan that we're working, we're dealing with things. And I think that's so critical in cities. Sometimes it's based on crisis management. We have a crisis today, let's handle it today. Well, I think I have a responsibility as a community leader to do more than that. And I plan on doing more than that. And I think if you can do that in all your organizations, I think you'll have a better organization yourself. And I think from schools to church groups to whatever you're in, being smart, planning the future, and working with people is critical. Picture of the hospital, I think everybody likes to look at pictures. I think you can see all these online, but they're neat things. But really, it's important that we understand where we're going, what we're doing. If you do not understand that, then you need to get with a group, sit down, decide to plan, make a goal. And you don't have to hire professionals. Just sit down and what are you trying to achieve in your community, your organization? Again, I'm not going to give you all the technical stuff. They'll do that for planners and all these people will. I'm telling you right now, it takes leaders, and leaders have to do say some tough things, have a vision, be able to stand up in meetings and take some bullets and understand that, I may not be the winner of this whole thing today, but even when I'm gone, but people will reap the benefits because it's that important for me to sacrifice my job and my family and what I'm doing. It's difficult, but at the end of the day, it's good for that community. And I think as public servants, sometimes we forget that we are servants. We are trying to do what's best for the community, or we should be doing that. And many times, I think people forget that, and it's about what's good for them. And that's not how, and that's not why communities will grow. They'll grow because people want to do the right thing, and they'll do the right thing. And I think, I've heard a lot of people say, if you're going to have a disaster, have it in the Midwest, because people here work together, they're common sense, and they get things done. They roll their sleeves up and they say, what can I do to help you? But let's have a plan, because if we have that plan, we'll be successful. I'm very proud to have the LEED Platinum City Hall, LEED Platinum Incubator. We had, we can go on and on, all the LEED Platinum and LEED facilities we built. And not because, LEED was a neat thing, and we marketed that, and that's great. But the most important thing is they're energy efficient. We used resources that were locally, and we're doing the fiscal responsible thing for the city long term. Little comments, capturing water, using gray water for toilets, or energy using passive solar, just so we don't have to put a tremendous amount of energy in the building. I mean, just some smart technical things that people like, well, that's going to cost 10% more. Yeah, but it's going to save you, because we're not building buildings for the next 20 years. We are building buildings for the next 100 years. And Greensburg was a town that had many great buildings, great facilities that were built 100 years ago. That's what we're doing today. Let's not just slap something up and call it good because we was able to do that so quickly. Let's do something better. And I think that's the challenge that we all struggle today, is how do we do something better? And it's important to work with the community to do that. Of course, business came back, business took challenges. If everybody's not on board, then you're going to have a struggle. And I think it's important you work with everybody. I work so close with my chamber day to day. It's so important to work with the business, because if we don't have jobs, we don't have a community, and those are the challenges every city faces today. But again, I always go back to working together, having a vision, plan, and you'll be successful. Because we all want jobs. We're fighting for jobs every day, and I think the future is, and I think the environment and where we're going is the single biggest issue we fight today, because that's where jobs are going to be. They're going to change. Things are changing, and they're changing for the good. I'd rather be on the front of that curve than on the back of it, based on trying to react after it already happens. Greensburg, or any community I do work in, Clinton, or any other community I ever go to, I want to be forward thinking. And forward thinking is just common sense, but getting people to understand, let's do what's better for our community so we can be successful. 5 minutes, I got plenty of time. I told you he's the cutest kid, I'm telling you. We need to do things for future generations. When the night of the tornado, was a very eye-opening experience. But what it did tell me is that family, friends, people coming together is important, and leadership's important, and working together is important. And I keep saying those things over and over again, and I can't say them enough. And saying them is one thing, but doing is a whole nother. I like to think I like to coach my son's little, first grade basketball team. I'm like, come on, guys, let's plan this thing, let's do this thing, let's not give up. And I'm a cheerleader sometimes on the sidelines. That's all I'm doing. I'm a big cheerleader. You ever coach 7-year-olds? I mean, they're going to do what they do, but we'll coach them and help them and move them forward. That's what we need to do as community leaders, and work with people and understand that's where we're going. And I will ramble a lot about that, but I will tell you, my passion runs deep for doing the right thing for my community. You know, I'm in a community now that is very diverse. And how do we reach people with language barriers or economic barriers? What's good for them? Is it good for, you know, the other folks in town? I mean, how do we do that? Challenges every day. But I'm embracing that challenge. You should embrace that challenge in your organization. And Greensburg is a great success story because of the planning, because of the things we did working together. And you know, and you know, I was just tweeting earlier. I was like, I'm at the conference here, and I'm now into that. I don't know if anybody's into that tweeting thing, but I am. So, but you know, communicating in all levels. We're now pushing a new website in Clinton where we're reaching out on Facebook and social media and different ways to get, you know, if you want to be involved, you've got to be engaged. But how do I engage you when you don't know? It's not just about the newspaper and radio anymore. It's about other ways, and everybody's got a smartphone. Let me tweet real quick while I'm here. But it is important that people understand that we're trying to get the message out. And if you're in a community and you're not getting the message, demand the message. Find out. We want to offer it. We want to do it. And we're all going to be successful if we do that. So I'm going to finish early so these guys can talk about the more important things, the technical things about it. But from a city manager's point of view, Greensburg was an amazing story because we came together. We had vision for the top. We had vision at the bottom. We came in the middle. We talked about it. We did it. We worked hard, we planned, we kept that vision. That vision continues today, and every city should do that. I think Joplin's, you know, I had an opportunity to meet in Joplin and talk to them, and you know, lessons learned. I don't want to reinvent the wheel, but I want to make it my way for my community, and we only do that by working together. So I will say thank you. If there's any questions, I will feel free to, I'll answer them, and follow me on Twitter. And Steve Hewitt's on Twitter. And city manager's always talking about something going on in the community. So thank you very much. All right.
Thank you, Steve. Way to energize the group. I like that talking fast. Steve was a real hero in the community. You get a sense of his charisma and power of leadership. Was really extraordinary, and I had an honor of working with him. And a lot of what happened in Greensburg and why it happened was due to Steve's risk-taking, leadership, vision. So thank you, Steve, and thanks for coming and sharing that today. Next is Jonathan Raiche. Jonathan, as I like what Diana said about letting people go to your books to read their bios, but Jonathan's been involved in a number of natural disasters in one capacity or another, and he was right at the heart of it in Joplin, and he was identified early on as kind of the champion and the touch point for sustainability in the rebuild of Joplin. Jonathan?
Well, here's the clip. I just wanted to give a quick background to a reminder. We're about coming up on a year and a half after our tornado in Joplin. And like Steve did, just here's a quick summary reminder of where we were at on May 22nd. It was an EF5 tornado with over 200 mile per hour winds. It does say the distance traveled there was about 13 miles. You'll see in the next slide, the concentrated damage was really about 6 miles long and a half mile wide. We did have an estimate of 7,500 residential units damaged or destroyed, 161 deaths, 530 businesses affected, and quite a bit of damage to come back from. But hopefully the focus of my presentation will be on the leadership of as they've mentioned before, and really focusing on, as Steve alluded to, the necessity of meeting in the middle. And you'll see, hopefully I'll talk a lot of the citizen-driven process. So here's that map that I mentioned, just to give you an idea, an overview of the tornado damage. You'll see the the red obviously is the most damage in the structures, and I don't think I'll do this too much in my presentation, but if you ever hear the EDR, people in Joplin get bogged down in a lot of the technical terms, but that's the main boundary in the middle there for the expedited debris removal area, and that's where we've had to focus a lot of our recovery efforts. Okay. All right, and the process that took place, the recovery, the planning, all that in Joplin was really citizen-driven, and this is thanks to a great team of FEMA folks, which Steve Kastner is here and will give a presentation later. But we received a lot of support from federal and state government groups to help this process along. And the group was called the Citizens Advisory Recovery Team, and it was just a group of, it was really the driving force for our whole recovery and still is today, a group of community leaders, but citizens, not elected officials. This was the bottom-up approach. And just to give you a little bit of an overview about it, of the whole process, very quickly. The CART, as we called it, was divided into 4 sectors, just to kind of break down into specialty groups. They were housing and neighborhoods, infrastructure and environment, schools and community facilities, and economic development. And the process started the first large-scale community meeting, and that's probably my biggest point in the whole presentation. Steve did mention this as well. The community engagement. This is the reason I'm talking about this process and sustainability is because Joplin, we had to define our recovery for our town, just like every other community has to. And sustainability was one of the biggest things that we had to define. We had to let our own residents define that for our community. So we did that through a few large community meetings. Again, the tornado was on May 22nd. The first large community meeting was on July 12th. We had it at a school, and it was a huge, I think, neither of those pictures are from it, but just imagine a huge school gymnasium with poster boards, and Steve may know the exact number of Post-it notes. I don't remember that, but the idea was just giving citizens Post-it notes, and they could go around and write their ideas down and post them up on the boards. The result of that large community meeting was a 50-page, single-spaced booklet of community input that was generated and published and distributed throughout the community after that meeting. The follow-up to that was a meeting on August 16th at a local church where those ideas that were developed into that 50-page book were refined a little bit, and common themes were met in these 4 sectors, were found and posted, and people could then vote on their highest priorities for the recovery effort. A follow-up to that was another large community meeting was in October. There was a design charrette, which is also, later in the conference, there are some presenters from AIA, the American Institute of Architects, that will talk about that, I believe. Their design assistance team was a great help to us in this, and that was one of the last steps to help put some imagery to these themes that the citizens came up with. And then the follow-through was the CART, the citizens group, presented this both to Joplin City Council in December, and then later in January, the big milestone for the citizens of Joplin was a presentation that was held at Missouri Southern on their campus, and it was a joint board meeting for the City of Joplin, City of Duquesne, the Chamber of Commerce, the school district, and it was all boards there at one time to hear the presentation, the results that started with that 50-page booklet of citizen input and was refined into themes and projects that the citizens wanted to see. So the joint meeting and all the boards approved and adopted the plan, and it was just a great success, and that was the meeting in the middle that Steve got to as it happened in Joplin. So throughout the presentation, I'm just going to go through, try to highlight a few of the projects that came out of this process that relate specifically to sustainability. The Housing and Neighborhood Group had a couple projects that had some pretty obvious connections to sustainability. They were a pilot neighborhood, including green space, walkability, connectivity, and pilot neighborhood houses, so the structures themselves to make up that neighborhood. This is a project, we're at the 1.5-year mark. We've made a lot of strides. This one is still in the works. This is an opportunity where Greentown has been in connection with a lot of the local groups, and we've been trying to make progress in this one. We have now a process for land acquisition with the city to kind of help accumulate land for projects like this. The main efforts or strides that we've taken for this so far is during this time during the CART process, we also had the ability to update our comprehensive plan for the city. And this was it was scheduled just before the tornado start. We postponed it because of the tornado, and we're able to incorporate a lot of ideas into our comprehensive plan. And I think one of the ones that will help these two projects was our ability to add mixed-use zones and ideas that will help really allow for these types of neighborhoods that the CART asked for. And here's a slide with some excerpts from our comprehensive plan that I'm not sure if the text is big enough, but I'll kind of highlight a couple of the design guidelines that I think will be helpful as we move forward with these neighborhoods, the pilot neighborhoods. And even if these projects don't come to fruition exactly how they're intended, these goals will still help in sustainability and mixed use. We have the first one in the top left there, just the idea to design with adjacent neighborhoods in mind, using materials and themes that make you a good neighbor as a commercial development. And just design elements to introduce streetscaping, encourage walkability, and mixed-use developments. There's one example that we've had already. It was a success, I think, because of this. We had a Taco Bell on our main street in the middle of the construction area, and they're in the midst of rebuilding now. And one of their changes that they made to their site design, was to include a community park on their site. So they acquired a little more land. They're facing Main Street. They acquired land the half block behind them, and across the street from that is a neighborhood, residential area. So they have incorporated a neighborhood park, picnic area, but in the site design phase with the city, they really did intend it to be a neighborhood use. And those are the types of things that we think will be great assets to the community and sustainability. The main sector that had a lot of sustainability related projects was the Infrastructure and Environment Group. And I'll try to go through these and give you ideas of our progress that we've made for them so far. Requiring bike lanes for all new street construction of a certain level. Sidewalks installed on both sides of the street. Previously, the city's code was just that for new development, you only had to have sidewalks on one side of the street. And then the third was a Joplin Creek trail system. There was an existing trail system, but it was along this creek system was a lot of loop trails, and the citizens asked to create more of a continual trail system through the heart of the city. We have a few of the one of the government partners that will be a huge help in this effort. We'll be receiving some technical assistance from EPA to do a code audit, which will help us go through and identify not only these elements that the CART identified, but other elements in our zoning code that may be barriers to sustainability. And so it could include, upping the sidewalk requirement and bike lanes. So that is something that we are in the process of. The scope of work is done, and hopefully in the next year, as we do update our codes, this code audit will be a huge help. The trail system is going to be interwoven into a stormwater project. That's a detention plan, and I think in a couple of slides you'll see a little more information on that. But we have a diagonal park system that goes through the city, and we're going to be doing a creek restoration with trails along that. Here's just a quick slide. We did receive community development block grant funds for disaster recovery, and just wanted to point out the emphasis on the infrastructure and the 6.5 million there basically for those goals between sidewalk construction, trail construction, and tree planting, which I will mention later as well. The other option that we have through the EPA for a project is a Green Streets initiative, and it's highlighting our 20th Street corridor. And this is going to be in conjunction with the code audit, but EPA will provide technical assistance to us to help design the 20th Street corridor, which is our main commercial corridor in the tornado area, and design it more sustainably. This will include a multi-day charrette with that. I'm sure it hasn't happened yet, but I'm sure will be somewhat similar to our AIA charrette, and will be just a great help. You can see on the map the diagonal green with the stream. That's the creek where the detention project will be, and that will also link into our trail system and the 20th Street corridor being a green and complete street project. Here's the stormwater and trail improvement project on Joplin Creek restoration. It's just proposed to be a 7-acre site restoration of the concrete channel, which it stands now as, and just more of a natural restoration of it to reestablish meandering single-thread channel, reduce flow speeds, just a lot of great elements that will be woven into this project, and it's highlighted there on the bottom left corner as to its proximity to 20th Street. The next list of projects is mentioned there: create water retention and bioswale areas. This is one, again, the previous project, the Joplin Creek restoration, is going to be a huge effort toward. But there's also been our local Audubon Center has made great strides to work with local nonprofits, installing rain gardens and educating the public during that effort. They installed, let me see if I have the numbers here. I don't think they installed a handful of rain gardens in nonprofits and used volunteers, and it says they engaged over 200 people in installing these, and it was a great education effort to go towards that goal. The fifth point there, which Steve also mentioned in his talk, was the citywide curbside recycling. We didn't have any we have recycling facilities in the city, but they were just a drop-off facility. And this is something that Greentown, Joplin, and the Young Professional Network are working together with to educate the community. And it has since this project, it has been brought to our city council and brought to the attention, and it's making great strides in going further with that. The last, number 6 there, educate residents and business owners about stormwater management, recycling, mentioned those two, but then the reforestation practices. Rick with MDC is here, and he'll be giving a talk later about that if you get a chance to sit down on that. But he was a staff with Missouri Department of Conservation that was assigned to our area, and has been a great help in making sure that our reforestation of the urban area is continued to be a priority. Recycle Joplin, that was the consortium group kind of the Young Professional Network that has done a lot of public awareness campaigns and surveys to push the curbside recycling effort forward. So, well, that's all. They've been doing quite a bit, again, to be a liaison for the community to our elected officials. Much like Steve mentioned, we did have in the past, the idea of curbside recycling come up, and there was just not always the most popular idea due to further costs. So there's the education, the research. There's just a lot of citizen-led efforts being put forth in this project that have really helped build steam and prove to our city officials that this is something that the community wants. My last point is a group of slides that I wasn't going to get into too much because this isn't my area of expertise, is the actual green building, but I just did want to highlight a few projects and encourage you to, there are a few residents here from Joplin and builders from Joplin here that if you get a chance, they'll be presenting specifically on their projects. And these are just wanted to highlight a few of the green building efforts that have been made. And again, these are purely resident and builder-led initiatives. So all the kudos should go directly to these people. But this picture is one an ICF constructed home right near 20th Street. Again, our main corridor. And the opening of this house said to attract about 200 visitors. So the education around these types of events and openings has been great and eye-opening for our community. This slide shows one of the projects that used, it was a partnering with Global Green Building, and this was a nonprofit Convoy of Hope that had plans to build, I believe, 12 homes with ICF construction for tornado-affected individuals. And at the 1-year anniversary date, there were at least 6 homeowners that were moved into these ICF homes. Hopefully they'll go into more detail about these projects, but you all know the affordability of these homes was a huge deal for our community. And this picture is one that I believe they are presenting at this conference as well. Hugh and Ramona Shields rebuilt their home using structural insulated panels, SIPS construction, and Goodwill Builders, if they're here as well. Catherine, right? So these are, just wanted to highlight and kind of give an introduction to some of these projects. They use SIPS construction, passive solar energy in their home. Not going to go too much into it, but again, these are just residents that had a passion, stepped forward and really made strides to show residents what could be done. And the last type of construction is Frank Schaefer, who is here with Schaefer Construction, also has been making efforts with Energy Star, and we'll be talking about his own home, I believe, and just efforts with his construction company. That's how he's going to further green building in Joplin. I'll leave the details to those people, but just wanted to highlight again a lot of our projects that the community asked for are being acted on, and we continue to work with our citizens group. And I think that has been the key really to our success, was making sure that these projects and these ideas were rooted in the community's desires and needs. So with that, I'll end it, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. It points up the importance of community feedback, and I would add that having entities in the community, whether they be nonprofits or just citizen champions, shepherding these projects through, because great ideas generally have a lot of energy on the front end, but unless they're really ridden through, they tend to die out. So that's a very important point. Thank you, Jonathan, for your presentation. Next, Dennis Knobloch with, again, coming to us from Valmeyer, Illinois. I'll let him introduce himself and tell his story. Dennis, come on up.
My name is Dennis Knobloch, and I currently serve as the village administrator in Valmeyer. I grew up in that area. Valmeyer is a small town about 35 miles southeast of St. Louis. Valmeyer was founded in 1909, and development there was a result of the railroad being built through in the early 1900s. Population 900. It's typical small town America. Hot dogs, apple pies, and parades. Valmeyer was, however, not distant from disaster. During the 1940s, there was a series of floods that came through the community that drastically affected the activity and development there. It was a series of floods, 1943, 1944, and 1947. And it was especially hard on the agricultural community that surrounds the town. Starting in 1947, just after that last flood, the homeowners, the businesses, the farmers in the area lobbied with the state and federal government, and they were able to convince the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to build a protective levee system along the entire western boundary of Monroe County. It's about a 35-mile stretch, and the river runs just to the west of Monroe County. Valmeyer lies inland from the river about 4 miles. And it's tucked right against the river bluff, which is to the east of the town. So, in the early 1900s, I was part of the business community in Valmeyer, and FEMA came riding into town with a suitcase full of floodplain maps. And they said, if you folks want to continue to allow your residents to be able to purchase flood insurance, you're going to have to pass some ordinances which will restrict your building within the floodplain, and on and on and on. Well, it drastically affected the building activity in the community. We had no new construction after we put these ordinances into effect in the early 1980s. 1989, I was convinced to run for my first term as mayor in Valmeyer to help make these nasty floodplain ordinances go away. We were protected by a levee system that had been built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, completed in 1950. And from 1950 until 1989, when I took over as mayor, there was not one drop of flood water that had touched our community. The levee system that we had was touted as one of the best in the Midwest, one of the best ever built by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So why in heaven's name do we need floodplain restrictions? Well, went through the first 4 years of my term, and it was time to decide whether or not I should run again for mayor in the beginning of 1993. I asked my wife, and she said, yeah, if you want to do it, go ahead. Nothing happened the first 4 years, so why not run again? I didn't divorce her over that, but we have had some words. The big thing that bothered me, that it just always stuck in my craw about these floodplain restrictions, was that when you laid the map on the table and looked about what the major flood event was going to do, this big event that was being predicted by FEMA, we have a park with a ball field that's on the east side of our town, and the map clearly showed that in the event of this disastrous flood, first base was going to be underwater and third base was going to be dry. And I kept telling these folks, how ludicrous can you be that in the event of a flood, half of our ball field is going to be wet and half is going to be dry. We were involved in a flood fight. August 2nd, 1993, we lost that battle, along with hundreds of other communities in the Midwest. Now, in listening to the stories of Stephen and Jonathan that were up here earlier, you always have to look at the bright spot in a disaster situation when you're involved. And in looking at what happens in the case of a tornado, I'm happy we had a flood. We had a flood fight. We had time to react. We had time to tell our residents, prepare, pack up some of your belongings, get them out of town. At least move them up to the second floor of your home. Do something to safeguard. The folks that go through a tornado don't have the time to react. Whatever's there is lost. So I feel fortunate that we had a flood. I also feel fortunate that I lived on the right side of town. At our house, we had 8 feet of water, where the folks on the west side of town had 16 feet of water. So you always have to look at the bright side. And to rub a little salt in the wounds, there it was. First base underwater, third base dry. This is an aerial of our town shortly after the middle of October of 1993. 96% of our structures in town were substantially damaged. Our town was underwater from August 2nd until October 15th of that year. One of the first things we were able to do, it was tough to get into the town to survey damage. We had to go in by boat. We did a lot of reconnaissance by helicopter just to see what the extent of the damage was. And we could tell early on, within the first 2 weeks, that going back and rebuilding the town in the same footprint it was, in the same location, was probably not going to be a reality. We were going to have to look at other options. We knew that we were going to try to go after whatever buyout assistance we could get for our residents, but then after that, it would be a concern as to whether or not they were going to take their buyout funds and go elsewhere. We looked at the options, ditto, community meetings, citizen input. This is your community. What do you want to do? We just kind of threw out that little bomb called relocation. This is probably the only way we're going to be able to save this town. Are you interested in trying it? Well, I've heard stories also about where is the textbook on what we're supposed to do. It's not there. We're coming up on the 20-year observance of our disaster in 1993. It wasn't there at that time. I've talked to people who were involved in disasters 20 years before that. It wasn't there at that time. So we were on our own, just like everybody else. One of the things that I came up with for the citizens was a little bit of a motto to let them know that what they had was a bad situation, but to always look at what can be done to get around that. And the motto that we used going through the flood was, if your rooster dies, buy an alarm clock. No matter what happens bad in your life, there's always something that you can do to get around that situation. So through the fall, we were going through whatever we needed to do, dealing with the situations at hand, working with the individual property owners to help them out with their personal situations, dealing with our village utilities, trying to work with FEMA, the regulators, the legislators, do whatever we needed to do. And probably, our town had made the decision to relocate after about 3 weeks, after community meetings following the flood early August. So at that time, the media was there. We had a lot of media attention on what we were doing. And a lot of folks were seeing that Valmeyer was thinking about relocating. I got a call. This was probably the first week in September. This was one of my good days. The water was up and down because we were in the main channel of the river as the water continued to flow through. We had a breach in our levee system, so until that was repaired the following March, we technically were in the main channel of the Mississippi River. If the river would go up 2 feet, we would have a 2-foot increase in the water level on Main Street. So this was one of the good days when the water level was down, and my cell phone at that time rang, and it was a paint salesman from Chicago by the name of Nancy Skinner. And she said, I see that you folks are thinking about moving your town, and I think you need to make sure you do that in a sustainable fashion. And I'm glad she couldn't see the expression on my face, because when I'm standing knee-deep in water trying to solve all of the problems that we had going on at that time, fighting off the sharks, and she's throwing some kind of word at me that I've heard but don't have half a clue what the hell it means, I said, call me back in a couple weeks, and we'll see if the situation is any better. Well, she did. And within a few days of that, I also got a call from Bill Becker. And Bill Becker at that time was with the U.S. Department of Energy. And Bill had lived in Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin. and was very instrumental in helping Soldiers Grove, Wisconsin in 1978 when they moved a portion of their community out of the floodplain of the Kickapoo River. They were the first community in the country to adopt a solar ordinance for their business community. Very ahead of their time at that point. And Bill called and said, same thing. I hear you're thinking about moving your community. Wasn't quite as aggressive on what we needed to do, but we're willing to help you in any way we can to make your community a better place. As I mentioned, we were thrust into a series of community meetings, committee meetings. Again, we can't tell you enough how important it is to have the citizen involvement and citizen engagement in these activities. First of all, it allows those folks to bring their ideas to the table, and that's what we did. We had our residents come to the table and actually plan this new community that they were going to have. Every aspect of the community, from how wide the streets were going to be and where they were going to be located, to where should the school be and churches, and everything involved in the community development. They would bring their raw ideas to the table, and we had a team of experts there to help them turn that into a plan. We had planners, we had architects, we had engineers. So it went from raw idea through the minds of those folks onto a paper plan that we could then use to continue with our development. In addition to bringing the ideas of our residents to the table, it was great therapy for these folks, because 96% of our structures had been substantially damaged, so 96% of our residents were in temporary housing. And they needed something to keep their mind occupied, and so they were ready to move on from the disaster. We gave the folks a very aggressive plan on what they needed to do and goals on what they needed to accomplish. And by November, I had a completed draft plan in place that I could take knocking on doors when I went to talk to legislators and the regulatory agencies. In the fall of that year, I was asked on behalf of more than 250 communities in the Midwest to testify before Congress. And they got a much more fancy system than you've got, because they had lights that were flashing at me when I got close and they made me shut up. But there were a lot of things to do and a lot of questions to answer, but we got things done. The work continued, and things were on a path that we could start our relocation construction by the beginning of 1994. In January, these same folks that had called me about sustainable development invited me to come to a conference at the Wing Spread facility in Racine, Wisconsin, where a group that they called their dream team of sustainable designers, architects, and planners were going to come together and decide how to assist all of the communities that had been flood-stricken and were thinking about rebuilding. My idea and my goal in being there was to act as their reality check. Every time all of these crazy liberal thinkers got drifting up in the clouds, I was supposed to grab them by the feet and pull them back down and say, hey, wait a minute. You're dealing with real people here. You're dealing with real situations. That's not going to work. This is the direction you need to go. I think the conference was about 3 days long, if I remember right. And going in, I was very skeptical about what the outcome of this conference was going to be. It opened my eyes to the things that we could do to make our community better than what it was before. We had the group that was involved in the Wing Spread Conference. I invited them to come to our community, and we had 2 sessions with them in the community with our residents. And one of the people in our community, after one of the conferences was over, said, when members of the design team first talked about passive solar energy, I thought this was just some weird liberal concept that had nothing to do with me. But when they explained what it meant in practical terms, that it was just how you orient your house in relation to the sun and the type of materials you build with, then it made perfect sense to me. By the time we met with these folks, we were well into the planning, well into the design, well into the construction phase of the project. So we couldn't carte blanche take the plan that they wanted to help us with and lay it on top of what we were doing. But we did have some successes in what we were doing. This is our emergency services building, which was designed by a local architect with the assistance of an architect from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And it's a passive solar facility with much of the heat for that building being provided by the sun that comes in through the clear story windows on the top that heats up the water that's stored in the fire truck tankers that are parked inside. Another area of success that we had was with our homeowners. We were able to convince our State Department of Energy to come in with seed money to provide grants for homeowners who completed a set of 16 steps in building their home that dealt with energy efficiency and smart building products. We had quite a few of our homeowners that actually put in ground source heat pumps. In the spring of 1994, Valmeyer was recognized during President Clinton's Earth Day address for our sustainable development activities, and we later received an award from the President's Council on Sustainable Development. This is Valmeyer's new location. It was laid out in a pedestrian-friendly fashion. Sidewalks throughout the schools and churches are at the hub of the community. And the one thing that our residents wanted when we had our initial meetings, the key to the success and longevity of our community, it's 400 feet higher than our original location. We're high and dry. Our business community has developed more slowly than our residential community, but one of our major successes in the area between our old town and new town was a 6 million square foot underground limestone mine that was no longer being used, and we have since turned that into an underground business complex, with our largest tenant at this point being the National Archives and Records Administration. They have over 1 million square feet of military records that they are storing there, and we're looking at expansion in the near future with them. As far as I'm concerned, the key to our sustainable development, we are alive, we're healthy, we have grown from the population that we had at the time of the flood. Population at that time was 900, we're now up to 1,200. Our community institutions remain strong. Our churches, our civic groups are very strong and keep the community together. At this point in time, we don't look back on the things that we didn't do. We look back on the things that we did and were able to accomplish that have made our community a much better place than what it was prior to the 1993 flood. Thank you.
Very inspiring. Thank you so much. I think Dennis points out one of the reasons a network, a sustainable disaster recovery network like we're developing now, is so important. Because if Greensburg had had the benefit of your experience, it would have been much easier. And really some great lessons you learned. And I'd like to take a few minutes to ask a couple questions. We okay on time? Okay, great. Steve, why don't you talk just a little bit about what if, so somebody's looking at this soon after a natural disaster in their community, what would be the top 3 things that you would advise them?
Well, top 3 things to advise to a community. Well, I think we hit on a lot of that. I think all 3 of us did, that it's important right away to communicate. Communications became a huge issue right away because all communications was completely wiped out. So we brought in temporary ways to create, mobile access, and I think even things have happened even since 2007, from social media and different things, and to allow, how do you communicate? You have a town that's wiped out. Where do people go to get information? A lot of that stuff is important, and I think communications. So to grasp the communications effort is number 1. I mean, just simply, how do you get basic information out to people? let alone then beginning the next phase of communication, which is, here's what's affecting you, here's what I like to do in planning, how do you talk to people? So it's communication leads into the planning. So I still think it's important, and I'll repeat this over and over again, planning and having a plan that you work with the community is critical. So communicating with your community about what's happening, and I'm sure both these gentlemen can tell you about that, especially right after a flood. What's happening, where do services go, what's going to happen, where can I go to stay, where's a shelter, on and on. But then now, what's our next direction? And then where are we going to have planning meetings? And how do we get that information? How do we, talk about things? How do we bring people to the table? And then last is just maybe just services themselves. And what we talk about so much about planning, and the communications, but services. What services do we need to provide immediately, down the road, future, and beyond that? So there's so many aspects, and it filters off to so many other areas. I mean, the services for the hospital, the services for your business community, the services, just to maintain government. I mean, the logistics of maintaining a government after a disaster is absolutely, it's chaotic. I mean, City Hall was in a tent for a number of days, and it was in a bus, and then it finally moved to a temporary building, which that was 3.5 years, it seemed like. So I think it was actually about 3 years, and then we moved into finally a facility to work out of. We didn't have police cars, fire engines, ambulances. We didn't have anything. So how those services, how's that all developed? And I think those are things. But again, you got to make sure, because people, I know when I talk to my wife, she doesn't even care about the city. She doesn't care about it. She's like, you take care of it. And so there's a lot of people like that. So it's important that we do take care of it. We make sure to provide clean water, and how to travel the roads, and a lot of people just care. I can turn my lights on, flush the toilet, turn the water on, it's all safe to drink, yada yada. Well, we got to make sure to offer that services. So those are kind of some things I would say in a nutshell that we continue, because you're dealing with the day-to-day aspects and of trying to bring back services, plan, communicate, and it just kind of all rolls into one. And how do you go from there? So it's a very I will say, if I could have one thing back, and I'll answer a question if you ever ask this, but if I could have one thing back, it'd be some hair. Because I'll tell you what, it's stressful, and you lose a lot of hair and a lot of sleep, and so I don't have very sustainable hair right now. But I joke a lot, because I think you got to inject some humor and understanding. Boy, we went through a lot, and I will never ever. Maybe I didn't say this before. I'm extremely proud of what we've accomplished and what the community continues to accomplish today and tomorrow, as every community that goes through this will. But I do think it's important that you do have some perspective and work it and plan it and grow and communicate.
Can I do this? Can I just take this out? Yeah, having been there and observed Steve, it was amazing. And the number of meetings that there were, and the number of meetings that's necessary to get the kind of input and buy-in that you need, it's exhausting. And Steve demonstrated incredible endurance during that time. Jonathan, do you want to talk about the top 3 things you would advise from your vantage point?
Sure. Are these? Yeah, I guess one of the first things that I've learned from our city manager and my boss is to not be afraid to ask for something that's not being offered. There's a lot of outpouring of support from federal, state, nonprofits, a lot of organizations, but just because they come to you with tools and solutions that they've used before, don't be afraid to challenge or ask for something different. I think we found out that they were open to those questions, and I think we did have some instances with housing and things where we were able to kind of do things a little differently, and that really helped our community. So that would be the number one. I don't know if I have too many other bigger ones, but the citizen outreach that was mentioned, big point on that is, I don't know if there's a solution, but making sure that you are reaching out to the entire community. I think we all kind of assumed that when we were talking about it, but you have to make sure, especially after a disaster, people are displaced. So make every effort you can to reach out to those that are, could be hundreds of miles away at that time, and that has a lot to do with the communications that Steve mentioned, and then the tools that you can use for that. But I think I'll leave it with my top two.
So once again, it comes back to communication, and Steve talked about the importance of a communication strategy, which you're developing proactively, so it'll be in place for a number of reasons, but most importantly, probably in an emergency. Dennis, you want to talk about boiling down your recommendations?
Real estate, it's location, location, location. In disaster follow-up, it's citizen involvement, citizen involvement, citizen involvement. No matter what aspect of the project you're involved in, you have to pull that to the top before you start making decisions, because everything you're doing, no matter what decision you make in the community, it affects those citizens, and you need to have their input and make sure you're going the direction they want you to go. Beyond that, you have to make sure that you have leadership that knows how to juggle, because constantly things are going to be thrown at you that you're going to have to deal with. Probably one of the worst days of my life, this was mid-January '94, as we were kind of finishing up our part of the planning process, getting involved with the state and federal agencies. And I was involved on a conference call as we started to do a combination environmental assessment process for the original part of the town, which we had to complete to go through the buyout, and the new part of the town, which we had to complete to be able to develop that as our new relocation site. I was on a conference call with representatives from 23 different state and federal and local agencies, with 2 people from each of those agencies on the phone. Have you ever tried to talk in a conversation with 46 other people when everybody's trying to interject what they want to say in the conversation? And that was kind of the way things went. The second worst day of my life was when we found out that maybe this is a good place where we're moving our town to, because 5,000 years ago there were people that thought the same thing. When the archaeologists uncovered several villages that were built there long before we decided to build a village there. So those are the types of things. There's constantly something that's going to be thrown at you that you're going to have to deal with. Everything is going to cause a delay in the project. We promised our residents that they would be back in their homes by Christmas of 1994. We missed that because of all of the delays we wound up with in dealing with the environmental assessment and trying to keep all of the agencies happy on what they were doing. That's another one of the things that at the time that we were involved in the process 20 years ago, there wasn't as much coordination among all of the state and federal agencies at that time as what you're seeing now. I think they have kind of stepped up their pace a little bit, working with one another. There were multiple times that we would get a list of guidelines from one agency as to what we needed to do to comply with them. And if we complied with agency A, we were out of compliance with agency B. And there was a lot of those problems where you did one thing, but then you had to change it because the other agency didn't like it. Put us back in the process, and we wound up being until the following spring before we got people in homes. But you just have to be able to work at what's thrown at you.
Thank you. We're going to open up to questions in a second. I just want to add that community input and participation is hugely important, but never underestimate the power and importance of leadership. Again, in my experience in Greensburg, if it hadn't been for Steve and his strong leadership style and the willingness to take some shots, and quite a few shots actually, I often referred to him as like the quarterback in the pocket. He would often get tackled, but other times he'd make great passes. And it was incredibly important to have somebody with vision and drive to lead the group. Anybody have a question for any of our panelists?
I'm an occupational scientist and occupational therapist, so I have concerns about how people spend their time and how they make use of time. And I think about after disasters, how there's what we would call occupational deprivation or loss of, and people lose the ability to do the typical things of their days. And as we were talking today, I heard all kinds of great ideas. But a way I was thinking about, how did you honor the loss? How did you honor what the town had looked like before when you physically moved it to another place, or that, just so that people had history in what was there before. So I just was curious about that.
In our case, we had one of our committees that picked that up as one of their causes. It was our Social Services Committee, and one of the first things they did after we found out that all of our 96% of our structures were going to go through the buyout program and be demolished, they actually went around town and collected architectural ornamentation from as many buildings as they possibly could, with the idea that those eventually would be brought together into some type of a formal museum setting to honor the old town. Another one of the things that we did in the planning process, since most of the original town was going to be abandoned, we encouraged our planning committees to try to resurrect some of the street names and some of the things that they could from the original town. One of the things that I helped design, I gathered a lot of architectural ornamentation from our original school complex that had been built back in the 1930s. And we constructed a fountain in front of the new school complex made out of all of those materials. So as much as possible, we tried to make the old a part of the new.
I think in Greensburg's case, the same thing happened. That one of the things we've not talked enough about is volunteerism from the community in different groups. We had the Kiowa County Historical Group. We had other folks that were collecting memorabilia and different artifacts from the old part of Greensburg, because that was tough because you lost everything. My grandmother, she doesn't live in Greensburg anymore, but she'd come back and visit. And she goes, I don't know where I'm at. And so it's important that those folks do have some memory, and so there was efforts with the museum, which was so critical to put back about Greensburg and how its development, and then about how we went from the museum and what the town used to be and to now where it's going today. So, but really that's what's so critical, is that you do embrace the past, because one of the things, you can blow away all the buildings, but you don't blow away the memories, the values, the history, what made us as people. That stuff is still there. So it's important to embrace the past and how it leads to the future, because the people that built the past are the same kind of people that are building the future, and that's why Greensburg was successful in the past and why it's going to be successful in the future. And so it's but volunteerism and the community support to put that together. You can't do it all. I mean, the government can't do it all, nor should the government do it. It's got to be a private-public partnerships at many different levels are what make disaster recovery so successful. We may not have hit that earlier enough, but that leadership's important. But leadership does not come from just the government. It comes from church groups, schools, and other areas. And so bringing the history together, Greensburg did a great job of doing that, and two great museums today showing off what Greensburg once was and where it's going tomorrow.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll just add to, for Joplin, like they mentioned, we had memorial events, and one of our parks that was affected has certain memorials in them. But I did just want to mention one of our events, our CART group that I mentioned in my presentation, actually has a meeting today in our community, and one of the items still being discussed is just asking the community if the efforts that have been made to memorialize and honor our history has been adequate, or where we're at a different point, so we're just kind of still measuring that, I guess.
We have a guest, Scott Brown, like to ask a question.
Yeah, you're talking about leadership and stuff like that, and I'm sitting over there, and I'm from Greensburg. Look at Catherine. She's scared of what I might say. And there's no doubt about it, leadership is vitally, vitally important. But I want to tell you a little something about, I don't know too much about conferences, so I don't know whether this guy's not going to toot his own horn, but I want to tell you a little bit about leadership. After the tornado, we had people from Denver and Kansas City and St. Louis come to Greensburg. I'm from Greensburg. I happen to have the only building in Greensburg that really survived the tornado that was usable for anything. So everybody came out to my office and come in. And we had people that was going to do wonderful things for Greensburg. They was going to come build back the whole darn town. And we'll build you a new strip mall. We'll put you in a new Main Street. We'll do all this for you. Well, that sounds fine. Come on, do her. Well, now, do you think you can secure the property? Well, I'm in real estate. Yeah, I'll get the property for you. Just tell me where you want it. Just clean some trees and some brush and 2x4s off, and we'll get it for you. Well, that's good. Now, what kind of rent did those people pay? And I said, well, in Greensburg, Kansas, they paid from $150 to $400 a month rent. Oh, my. Well, we sure want to build you back a Main Street. Can they pay $1,500 a month rent? I said, mister, we had 1,400 people here, and they could pay $300 to $400. Now we got 800 people. Do you think they're going to be able to pay $1,200 to $1,500? No. So we had all these nice offers coming in, and they wanted to do something for you, but they wanted a return. They wanted 15, 20% return. One day, Daniel Wallach comes in shortly after the tornado, a month or so. And here comes this guy, and he doesn't look near as professional as he does today, but his hair was a little muffed up, and he's balding back here. And he comes in and says, I'm looking for Scott Brown. I said, I'll sit down. Another guy from Denver or somewhere. I didn't know him. Well, it comes to find out he was from Denver at one time, but now he lives 35 miles away in Stafford or up in that area. And he sits down and said, well, somebody said I ought to come see you. And I said, well, what do you want? So we sat down and we visited an hour and a half probably. And he started talking to me about green, maybe sustainability and green. And I said, wait a minute here. I said, green's a color. You mix it with red and it comes up with orange or something. I didn't know nothing about green. And he said, well, I think there's a niche here, and I've heard little rumblings from people like Steve and some of the community leaders about doing something green. And he says, now, while I'm up here, because he didn't know I was coming, I want to tell you a little bit about leadership. He sat down there with me, and I said, well, I don't know anything about the kind of stuff you're talking about, but obviously we got to rebuild. We might as well rebuild better. That makes sense. And maybe we should rebuild with more sustainability. That makes sense. But I said, I don't have any clue as what all you've got in your mind. But I says, what's in this for you, Daniel? I figured somewhere here he was going to come up with 12, 15% return he wanted, or a big high-paying job. I thought, here's a guy going to come to Greensburg and explain green to us, and he'll do it for $200,000 a year salary or something. And he said, no, I'm not talking about any salary. I'm talking about, and he had a vision of Greentown before he even knew that he had a vision of Greentown. And I said, all I can do for you is introduce you to some people that would maybe do you some good and talk to you. So I made some introductions to him, and it went from there, from a little old town in Stafford 5.5 years ago, him having the vision and these kind of people having vision, and with the right kind of leadership, to here we are in St. Louis, and we've got a Greentown Greensburg, got a Greentown Joplin, and Greentown is trying to do the right thing for the whole United States. So here's some leadership.
Thank you, Scott. Very kind.
My name is Anu Dixit, and I'm a SLU Medical School professor studying commercial mold remediation practices, the scientific basis, and through several grants from Department of Housing and Urban Development, we are trying to come up with best practices for controlling indoor mold, because as you all know, when we talk about green and sustainable development, we have to consider what happens when there is flooding, when there are damp environment. But aside from that, I wanted to just comment. I wanted to say hats off to these four gentlemen who are up on the podium, because I still remember the time, starting from Valmeyer. I have lived in St. Louis for the past 25 years. And sir, thank you for thinking outside the box. And same goes for Joplin and for Greenburg. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to be here to meet you and hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very kind. You got it. Okay. Thank you all very much for that session. Gentlemen, thank you for all the preparation you did and for coming and being with us. Really appreciate it.